Making sure everybody can come into the waiting room here. There we go. We got everybody. All right. More people will be coming in. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another NCSA webinar. We're very pleased today to have with us Michael Kranak from Oakland University. He's an associate professor and director of research there, and our friend Leslie Neely. Some of you remember her from DC last year. She'll be with us again at DC this year, and she's a dual professor at University of Texas at San Antonio, professor of educational psychology and neuroscience. And I reached out to Leslie earlier this year because they published a paper on, is there a problem with problem behavior and the terminology? And so I asked her about her paper. I was really excited about the research, and they graciously offered to do a webinar for us today to kind of explain what they found and talk about some additional opportunities for you to participate in the research that they have ongoing as well. So I'll just turn it over to them and let them get started. Please, everybody, just some housekeeping first, I forgot. We have a chat, and then we also have Q&A. So chat is for you to just make friends here, tell us where you're from, anything like that. But please use the Q&A box for any questions, because that helps us not miss any for you guys. All right, how about it, Leslie and Michael? Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thumbs up, Michael. You can see my screen and the slides. Great. So I'm Leslie Neely. As Jackie said, I'm a professor here at University of Texas, San Antonio. I've been working with individuals who have aggression, self-injury, property destruction, all sorts of different topographies of very concerning, dangerous, life-threatening behavior for about 20 years now. And so when Dr. Kranak and I were chatting about this project he was doing, I thought, man, I have to get involved. So I'll let Dr. Kranak real quick give a little introduction of himself.
So, like Jackie and Leslie both said, I'm Michael Kranak. I'm an associate professor and the director of research for the Center for Autism at Oakland University in Michigan, not in California, just to be clear. And as similar to Leslie, I've been working with individuals with the severest and most problematic, most dangerous forms and topographies of behavior for the entirety of my career. So for over a decade, working with these individuals. And I get I'm trying to dial it back, be professional,
Mhm.
really wait until we get to the discussion to start discussing things. But, and Leslie and I were chatting about this, and I know at least for myself, I've become rather concerned at what I would just candidly say is the dismissal of perspectives that, saying that somebody banging their head against the wall to the point where their retinals are, or where they're having retinal detachment, you can't say that's a problem. That causes me a lot of discomfort, and especially when I see individuals and their caregivers with profound autism having their perspectives be dismissed, all for the sense of, or all for the sake of what, the NCSA has termed very well as the sanitization of profound and severe autism. I think that's problematic, and no pun intended, just to be clear, no puns yet.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's just something that we wanted to say, okay, what is the state of the literature? What are people using to describe these behaviors and why? And so I'll let Leslie take it off and just get us started.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. So we published a paper called On Terms, Is There a Problem with Problem Behavior? A bibliometric prevalence analysis. And this is the first study that we have conducted. And then we have some follow-up studies that we'll share about after this. But generally in research, our very first thing we want to do is get a sense of what does literature say so far. I do want to recognize we have our students that contributed to this. So Kimberly Cantu Davis, Meredith Stevens, and Megan Wessel. There we go. So the words, and I think Michael kind of started talking about this, used to describe disability can influence public attitudes, policy decision, and personal identity. And this is particularly important for individuals who have autism and profound autism. So the language used to describe autism plays a critical role in shaping how individuals are perceived, treated, and supported. So you've heard a lot of kind of this discussion probably in the last 5 to 10 years, things about identity language. So labels such as autistic person, identity first, versus persons with autism, person first, can carry very substantial implications for advocacy, diagnosis, and service provision in the United States. And one thing that we've known as a lot of this research is coming out and that's been proven is that language preferences are not universal. So there's been a lot of guidance saying, hey, we want I know one of our journals put out a guidance that said we want you to use identity first language. And that actually, as research is coming from other countries, from other cultures, we're finding that that is not universal. So there was a really large study done in Denmark. So the Danish are really great at capturing this type of data. And they found that, in fact, their population does not prefer identity first language. They prefer person first language. So this gives us a lot of information about how we might gather this type of data. What's been done so far is there's been a lot of language debates. So we had that identity first language versus person first language, but there's always a debate that seems to be going on. So for example, there's a researcher, Dr. Bottom Butel, and she has an entire research line that's just focused on the language for autism. So she recently gave an interview talking about her perceived pitfalls regarding the term profound autism in particular. She's also published a paper in Autism, and that's a journal that she's an associate editor for. And she's talking about now, not just profound autism, but concerns regarding the term non-vocal and proposing minimally verbal as an alternative. And most of these, arguments center around claims being that these labels are not scientifically precise. They are, in fact, imprecise, according to her, clinically misleading, and socially consequential. And I don't think we disagree that those implications are there, because it's just who it is affecting and how that language is affecting. And so she prefers things like non-speaking versus the kind of non-vocal, for example. One thing really in particular for the population we're concerned about is this destructive behavior, right? So autistic individuals may present with that destructive and dangerous behavior, such as aggression, self-injury, property destruction, kind of the big three, pica, right? Elopement. There's a lot of really life-threatening behaviors and topographies of behaviors that our population may engage in. And it can endanger their health and their quality of life, as well as their family members, siblings, caregivers, affecting, how the family members might be able to engage even in the world, right? I have families who they aren't able to go to the grocery store. And if they do go to the grocery store, they have to make sure somebody is able to stay home with their child. There's all kinds of different estimates of this, but up to 86% of individuals with autism engage in some form of challenging behavior over their lifetime. And that results in 11% hospitalization rate, and with 65% of those children, so under the age of 18, treated with psychotropic medications. In fact, I just put out a paper talking about polypharmacy in autism and looking at that with individuals with autism, if they start one of the FDA-approved medications, which is Abilify and risperidone, they are more likely to have polypharmacy and shifting of medications after starting that one medication than if they did not start that medication, suggesting that if we're looking for a solution for severe and problematic behavior, we do not necessarily have a pharmaceutical solution yet. Further dangerous behaviors increase the risk of seclusion, restraint, incarceration. We know this, right? Individuals with IDD are up to 200% more likely to encounter law enforcement than the neurotypical peers in educational settings. That's not even in the community, just in their schools and educational settings. Okay, so this is the researcher we were talking about, Dr. Bhanama Patel, and she put out this article that has been very widely cited in 2021 called Avoiding Ableist Language, Suggestions for Autism Research. And a lot of language has focused, or a lot of the efforts to date have focused on that identity first versus person first, and less on how we describe those comorbid, co-occurring behaviors. And so this terminology we use to describe this behavior is incredibly important. It can shape how clinicians think about accepting a participant into clinic, or how insurers think about the necessity for treating this particular individual, and as well as influencing public policy. If everybody has a superpower, then maybe we don't need to be spending a lot of money on pharmaceuticals and interventions, because it's a superpower, right? It doesn't have effects on our health and our well-being. So labeling behaviors as dangerous rather than challenging could evoke fear, right, versus compassion. Alternatively, labeling behaviors as dangerous could rightfully highlight the importance of reducing or treating those behaviors. In contrast, some scholars, particularly from Kristen's lab, have called for removal of terms like challenging behavior and problem behavior from the professional discourse, citing specifically that first thing I discussed, which is could cause fear, could cause stigma for that individual. This widely cited article really targeted the terms problem and challenging behavior. And the authors argued that these labels are inherently pathologizing and may perpetrate ableist assumptions, especially when used to describe things like stereotypy. I kind of want to show you, this is the table that they had in that article. And this is table 1. It has a huge list of all of the terms that they're pointing out in kind of alternatives and suggested alternatives. The things they call patronizing language. And you can see there's challenging behavior, disruptive behavior, and problematic behavior. And I added the citations there on the right. So they have 4 citations supporting their recommendation of why we should abandon those terms and instead use meltdown or uncontrollable behavior, stemming when relevant, or specific descriptions of the behavior such as self-injury and aggression. So as researchers, right, I'm really interested in, I want to see the evidence that supports this recommendation. So I went and I pulled, very first thing I did, I read that article back in 2021 when it came out, and I wanted to see these citations and how it's supporting the removal of challenging, problematic, and disruptive behavior. And so I pulled this and I synthesized this for you guys on what's on the left of what these citations are. So the first is a checklist on a website. The second is the author's own article where she analyzed, I think it was 9 blog posts about stemming behavior in particular, a second article about stemming behavior. And then the last one, particularly that I think was being used, that fourth one, right, the checklist, was being used to argue against that disrupted, challenging behavior. And that is a YouTube video. So one individual's recommendation, who is an autistic individual, about how we should think about this behavior and those terminologies. Okay. Oops. I'm actually going to that YouTube behavior. We do not need to watch that today. Okay, so this is really, problematic because now we're basing an entire guidance on language we use to treat this population on a checklist and a blog. And I think a lot of the criticisms that we hear is where we're not taking into consideration autistic persons' thoughts about this. And I see some value right in that. And but in watching this discourse kind of evolve over the years, what I have seen is that very highly promoted are autistic individuals who are vocal, who can communicate. And if a caregiver who has a child who has profound autism, who has severe behavior, wants to chime in, they're often told that they cannot speak for their child. Almost to the point that sometimes the argument is that the individual who has autism, who does not know this child, has a bigger right to inform the care of that child than that caregiver. And so that's obviously a really big problem. Myself, I'm a caregiver. I have 4 kids. Obviously, I want to drive the care for my children. And so this has really stuck out to me as one of those pivotal points where we have gone astray. So narrowing into this idea of meltdown or even just topography only overlooks the clinical and contextual utility of these terms, in particular as applied to those behaviors that pose significant safety risks, interfere with learning and quality of life, and prioritize, honestly, social media portrayals that are more palatable, overall, right? Or better to promote. A really big issue, it risks replacing one top-down narrative with another top-down narrative. The argument is that researchers, that individuals who have been working with this population should not be driving that narrative, but instead of then, recommending that we give that, power, that voice to the individuals most affected, we're just selecting another top-down narrative, which is another individuals who have autism are therefore, just by virtue of having autism, are therefore more qualified to make that decision. Ultimately, this made, Michael and I, over our conversations, really underscore the need for that rigorous, shareholder-informed research that examines how behavior-related language influences treatment decisions, public perception, and lived experiences. This is one of given these ongoing debates and concerns, we think and have communicated with a lot of other researchers and families living with this, is that it's really essential to examine how behavior is currently labeled in autism research, because it's not neutral, right? The language just used to describe autism and associated behaviors is not neutral. So I got a little thing over there, right? We have a clinician and mom saying, hey, this is dangerous aggression, challenging behavior. And clinician is saying, oh, it's just a meltdown, right? Let's go ahead and monitor this. So the language needs to reflect the entire range of daily realities faced by individuals impacted by these behaviors. And this really includes individuals with severe and profound autism. And so as language continues to evolve, the relevance and appropriateness of terms like aggression, problem behavior becomes really important to consider. And we have broad labels like challenging behavior, problem behavior, disruptive behavior, and then we have the specific labels like aggression, self-injury. And so conflicting recommendations on how to label these we think, cannot be resolved by just conceptual arguments, right? Dispirited discussions, but really by evidence. And so that's what this article starts, is that line of research in understanding the usage trends of how these terms have been used to help to guide more productive decisions and research. So our purpose, we examined how frequently behavior terms like aggression, self-injury, how those behaviors were described in research using broader terms like challenging behavior, problem behavior. And we looked over time. So we picked art journals and we did a retrospective analysis looking at not just a snapshot in one particular year, but how it's evolved over a couple of decades. So this is some of the kind of more technical stuff. So articles were included if they met the following criteria. So the authors had to measure behavior targeted for reduction using a single case research design. They had to use one of the 12 terms used to refer to behavior. And so I actually think I might have this on this page. So problem behavior, destructive behavior, severe behavior, challenging behavior, dangerous behavior, aberrant behavior, complex behavior, interfering behavior, disruptive behavior concern, targeted behavior, or behavior targeted for reduction. We did have another category. And so just by saying that, I hope it's illustrative of we have a lot of terms. And I think Michael's going to talk about some of the concerns with that coming up. We hand searched and reviewed all of the articles published in the selected years across every journal. And authors, they had to, so if they used a term to refer to the behavior that they were targeting for reduction at least once in the article, it would count once towards one of the 12 categories. We did all of the right things you need to do for research, right? We looked at the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, focus on autism and other developmental disabilities research, and intellectual developmental disabilities, autism, and behavioral interventions. And that is guided by previous reviews that have done similar things, looking at trends in research quality and trends in autism research quality over decades. We also collected inter-rater agreement for both the literature search and the characteristics of the included articles, which meant that two of our reviewers, our students, independently reviewed blindly reviewed 33% of the articles, and we had 100% agreement. So that's really important for research because we want to be confident in our conclusions. We want to be confident in our data, and we want to replicate and make sure that the data and how we're presenting it and how we've extracted it is trustworthy, especially if we're going to be making recommendations based off of this. Okay, so we did include the most complete year of publication at the time of analysis, 2024, and then worked backwards. So 2024, 2014, and worked backwards from there so that we would have 30 years prior of data. And then, of course, we had these, we were quantifying the extent to which these following 12 terms were used to refer the behavior targeted for reduction. Let's see, so I talked a little bit about that inclusion criteria. Some of the exclusion criteria, if it was a review article, so it was synthesizing other articles, we did not include it. If it was survey-based only, we did not include it. It was a commentary or editorial. So sometimes, researchers will write a commentary or write a rebuttal to a paper or discussion only. If it was not data-based, right, we did not include it. So results. So we had 2,326 total articles. Of those, 189 met our inclusion criteria. So what I want to kind of point out about that is that meant that only 8% of the articles had some sort of focus on assessing this comorbid behavior or treating or something of that nature. And why that's really important is we have that statistic earlier that 89% of these individuals with autism engage in this behavior over their lifetime. Yet in our last 30 years, only 8% of our articles in some of the major journals have focused on this. And I think this replicates some of the previous conclusions we have had in that the percentage of the research that is focused on, that is conducted for autism is not representative of the percentage of the population that have profound autism. So I'm going to dive into this figure, but I'll just kind of give you an intro to the overall figure. So this is one of our figures, and it shows each of the terms on its individual graph. So there's 12 total terms, and on the x-axis is graphing those years, and on the y-axis is graphing the frequency in which those behaviors occurred. And what we're kind of looking for is relative change within each term across the years. And then also, if there's any trends between the terms. So here's a zoomed in view of 3 of the terms: problem behavior, aberrant behavior, and challenging behavior. So problem behavior is in the top left panel, aberrant behavior is in the top right panel, and challenging behavior is in the bottom panel. And again, x-axis is the years, and the y-axis is the frequency in which the terms occurred during those years. So as you can see, problem behavior, there was kind of an increasing trend. We saw that term being used more frequently 1994, 2004, and 2014. And then it fell in popularity, right? I'm saying popularity because that's kind of what happened, right? Researchers stopped using it somewhere in between 2014 and 2024. Aberrant behavior, was relatively stable, but we do see an overall decrease from 1994 to near zero levels in the last 20 years. An interesting challenging behavior. Challenging behavior was at relatively low levels in 1994, 2004, and then we see a sharp increase in the use of the term in 2014 and 2024. The other 9 terms, and I'm not going to kind of zoom in too much on those, showed a little variability in frequency over the years. 2 of the terms like disruptive behavior and target behavior, they were consistently used, high stable frequencies, consistent use over time. 2 of the terms, interfering behavior and behavior targeted for reduction. So that is interfering behavior is kind of third panel, middle, and behavior targeted reduction is last panel on the right. Those, they're not really used very frequently, so pretty low levels of occurrence. And then complex behavior, which is our third panel on the far left, and dangerous behavior, which is, let me find it, second panel in the middle, We see a little bit of variability in there, a slight increase in the trend in the last 3 years of analysis. Whether or not that will hold as we go forward, but just shows that we're starting to see some increase. Overall, the total number of terms used per year also shows a slight increase from 9 in 1994 to 10 in 2014. 1994 and 2004, 10 in 2014, and 11 terms in 2024. So this equates to an increase in 22% more terms used to describe this behavior targeted for reduction from 1994 to 2024. And Michael's going to talk a little bit about some thoughts on why we think that's happening and why this is now the time to really focus in on that, because we don't want 22% more terms every decade, right? That's actually going in the opposite direction. And then a follow-up statistical test revealed that there was statistically significant differences in total term usage across the years. Okay, and then figure 2, this one's actually showing it now each term, but the journals. And so why we were interested in this is some of the journals, I don't think any of the journals, right, Michael, actually have guidance on how you should use this terminology, but you can kind of see some of the culture of the journals have shifted over the years. So it shows the prevalence of each term per year per journal, and looking across the journals, the term severe behavior, which is the second panel on the far left, dangerous behavior, second panel in the middle, complex behavior, third panel, far left, behavior of concern, last panel, far left, and behavior targeted reduction, which is that last one on the far right in the bottom, show no clear differentiation in prevalence based on journal. So we're going to zoom in on just problem behavior. There's a reason why we termed this paper, "Is there a problem with problem behavior?" It's because we saw a lot of movement with this particular term. So for the term problem behavior, there really was kind of a high and stable usage across the Journal of Autism, Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. And we see some kind of increasing trends in some of the other journals. And that dropped, right? That major drop that we saw with the term problem behavior is driven by the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. We see a huge drop there. We also see with JAD, which is Journal of Autism and Developmental Disabilities, that is the open circle, we see an increase in the use of the term slightly for that journal, suggesting that the journals Applied JABA and JAD don't necessarily have some of the same culture. And that would make sense. They don't necessarily have the same editors across the two journals. Okay, I think this is the last slide I'm doing, Michael. So these are the last two I wanted to point out: destructive behavior and challenging behavior. So we see in these that destructive behavior, really only the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis use that terminology, which is really kind of an interesting piece there, is that maybe some of the JABA is driving some of this diversity in terminology. In the challenging behavior one, if you recall from the graph and problem behavior, that change in term and usage of problem behavior was driven by JABA. And so this graph showing the challenging behavior, what it is showing is that flip happened where researchers, editorial associate editors, the editor, seem to suggest that we might use challenging behavior instead of problem behavior, because you see a huge increase in that term in the year 2024, particularly for JABA. Let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing and turn it over to you, Michael.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leslie. Let me just make sure that big boomer energy right now, make sure my screen shares appropriately. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Leslie, can I get a thumbs up if it's sharing appropriately? Fantastic. And if everybody sees me looking over here, it's because I've got multiple monitors. So if I'm looking over here, I'm looking at folks in the chat and Leslie and Jackie, and otherwise I'm looking right here. So again, thank you so much, Leslie, for walking through that. And just to kind of put a pin in the rest of the results, there's not really a ton of differentiation across the rest of the journals with these rest of these terms. And one thing I want to go back to, Leslie mentioned that these journals, they don't offer guidance on specific terminology. In fact, the only journal that has specific guidance related to behaviors targeted for reduction or other behaviors engaged in by individuals with autism or autistic individuals is the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. That's the only journal that specifically says this is the language that we are recommending you using. And so, not to jump ahead to the discussion, I think that that's, at least for myself, one of the areas of concern is if we are going to, encourage authors or mandate authors to use certain terms, have that guidance be public facing. And so that was just an interesting and surprising, again, at least for myself, that only one of these journals had public facing guidance related to what type of terminology is expected to be used. And so, looking at disruptive and target behavior, again, we see across journals, there's not a ton of differentiation. Java has a little bit of decrease. And I think, too, that with disruptive behavior, that might be getting a little bit more specific to a specific type of behavior. So, think about disruption in a classroom, for example. And then with target behavior, I would argue that's probably a little bit more common in maybe some more experimental or translational journals where they're referring to, do you want to come to the webinar and see all the people for your patience and enjoying our
Oh,
guest
we love
presenter.
that. That makes
Yep,
you one of us.
yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. So that's an example of not problem behavior, right? That's not something that's behavior that was a little disruptive, but we probably wouldn't refer to that as problem behavior. Thank you, Jack, for the assistance. I appreciate you very much. And so I think that this, drawing from those medical analogies, that, illustrates very clearly why this matters, in autism research and really more broadly speaking with individuals with IDD or who engage in problem or destructive or severe behavior in general. And so we want to balance respect and precision while also not overlooking how serious some of these concerns can be. And so, for example, if we're advocating for care, and we're saying, oh, it's just a disruptive behavior compared to problem behavior, the term problem does carry that weight of, oh, it's a problem. This needs to be addressed. Whereas disruption, well, can we ignore the disruption or can we, find a way around it, for example? And I think too, one of the big takeaways, as illustrated by our data, is that the variety, it's increasing. We could describe this as a smorgasbord, one would say, of terminology used to describe all of these behaviors engaged in by these comorbid behaviors engaged in by individuals with autism. And I do think that, that it requires just a bit of candidness and honestly, not to pat ourselves on the back, but a little bit of courage to be able to talk about this because it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing that we need to be able to talk about and address this and recognize that there are a variety of perspectives. And so I do think we're seeing, this tension between, being respectful of individuals and their lived experience and, precision within our terminology. Although, again, not to jump ahead, it's interesting to me that we're supposed to only validate one set of lived experiences, i.e., those who can communicate very effectively with autism, those that can live independent lives and make YouTube videos and advocate for certain terminology. But interestingly, when a caregiver of an individual with profound autism says, hey, no, this is a problem, this is a challenge, their lived experiences are immediately dismissed. They're called ableist and said that they don't know anything about their child. And, that causes me not just discomfort and frustration, but it does make me very mad because when I see that happen, it is just like, how can we let that happen? How can that be a thing where we're supposed to be caring for and advocating for these individuals and to have them be told and their caregivers be told that their experiences are invalidated or don't matter? It just causes me, like I said, a lot of frustration. And so we obviously want to focus on the strengths of whoever we're working with, right? And it's not again, it's not a bad thing to say that, yep, they do a really great job, with some of their daily living skills, but at the same time, they're engaging in head-directed self-injury. It's not bad to say that head-directed self-injury is a problem. One of the clients that, really sticks out to me, I've had a client that, when they engage in rectal digging that necessitates hospital intervention, I'm pretty sure that's a problem. I think that goes beyond just being termed simple disruption or complex behavior. And one of the things that I want to stress is that we aren't, with this paper, it's the first of a series of studies that we're trying to conduct and that we are conducting on this topic. And we aren't, in this specific study, we didn't look at why these language changes are occurring. We have some hypotheses. All we did is we're just saying, hey, everybody, here's the state of the literature. Here's the current way in which these behaviors are being described. We didn't look at exactly why. And so any critique of our article should not be based on that because we aren't trying to assess the reasons why. We're simply assessing the state of the terminology. But we have about four reasons that we hypothesize that these language changes are occurring. And I want to note that these, potential reasons and motivations, they aren't isolated. In other words, one can advocate for term usage for all four of these reasons. For example, of course, we want to make sure that we're reducing any sort of stigma that this population is exposed to, right? I'm preaching to the choir, I imagine, with a lot of this. But especially with this, we want to make sure that our clients and these individuals that are engaging in severe behavior, they're getting every opportunity to live their absolute best life. They're getting able to be included in society as a whole and making sure that they are becoming the most successful, whatever that means to them, the most successful individuals and living the most independent lives as possible. And so if saying that, their behavior is a problem, if, for example, if that is going to cause ethical concerns, then yes, let's be mindful of that. Of course, have good audience control. Make sure that we're using the vernacular that's going to resonate well with whoever we're talking to. I also think that the second reason that there are some personal beliefs that are driving that are driving these changes in terminology. So as Leslie mentioned at the beginning, a lot of these recommendations are being made off of non-empirical evidence. And so like, oh, I saw this on a YouTube video. This is now what everyone must do. I believe personally that problem behavior is ableist. I will not let anyone else ever say the word problem behavior. And I think rather than tone police or word police our colleagues, our efforts are better spent working for and advocating for this population because we all know that, we need that strong voice to advocate for them. And so this infighting to me does us absolutely no good. And that kind of ties in with the last two reasons of broader social trends and editorial trends and perspectives, where maybe one individual who does have the perspective that the term problem behavior is ableist or pathologizing, they reach out to an editor or associate editor and they say, hey, I have a lot of, no pun intended, problems with this term. And they send them one specific article, and then they say, we need to stop all authors from using this term immediately. And so we have two examples that, both Leslie and I experienced in the peer review process. And sorry if anybody can hear my cats going at it right now. They have ran away, fortunately. Okay, yes, thank you. Very good. So this is a term, Leslie, I believe this is the one that you all experienced on your paper, and it was the authors elect to use problem behavior in their manuscript. I suggest they change this language throughout the manuscript given recent concerns with the term, and further stated bottom of Utel and colleagues may be helpful for the authors on this topic. And so Leslie litigated many of the issues with that paper previously, but I think that this comment underscores just how seriously some individuals, because of perhaps their own personal perspectives to be, as progressive as possible in their personal lives, they're letting that bleed into their professional life. And so that is ultimately what I think is happening here. And this was a comment that several or one of my colleagues and I received on one of our papers, and that was throughout the paper, consider whether you want to use more contemporary terms for phrases like compliance or problem behavior. I personally think most behavior targeted for reduction is indeed problematic, challenging, severe, etc., but I recognize that the field has moved on from these terms. The authors might choose to do the same. And I want to be clear, it's fine to have this perspective. Multiple perspectives are super allowed. Everyone's allowed to think that, they maybe you don't like the term problem behavior or challenging behavior. I'm not here to stop you from saying that. Interestingly, however, that same perspective doesn't seem to be held by all individuals. And so there does seem to be, again, replacing this top-down narrative with another top-down narrative that no one's allowed to think that these behaviors are problematic. And if you say this term, if you use this term, you are therefore ableist. And I just that I have a lot of feelings about that because I'm not sure that that's appropriate. I don't think that accurately reflects, the advocacy and the work that we're all doing, with this population. And so to be told that, the field has moved on, who is one reviewer to say that the field has moved on? And so I also want to be clear too that we aren't sharing these examples out of frustration, and we made this clear in the article. Again, don't care if you have this perspective. You're allowed to. It just illustrates what is happening in the peer review process with respect to this terminology. And so there are editorial, recommendations and guidelines that authors are being exposed to, but those guidelines aren't public facing. And so, a saying that I adopt from my dear friends and colleagues, if you're going to be a cowboy all the time. So if you're going to recommend and mandate that authors, change their language, just have it be public facing. I'm happy to use whatever terms the journal recommends, so as long as I know that ahead of time. And I think too that this also ties into some of the broader, literature that, Giacomo Vivanti and his group have been looking at with, the accuracy of information on social media sources like TikTok, for example. And so when we see individuals make recommendations for using terminology because they saw somebody advocate strongly for it on TikTok, or they saw an Instagram reel or a YouTube video, I don't think that accurately reflects, the entirety of, especially individuals with profound autism. And so I think it's important that we're recognizing that multiple perspectives exist and they're allowed to exist. And we need to make sure that we're recognizing those diverse perspectives, especially for individuals with profound autism and their caregivers. As I mentioned, one of the things that causes me a lot of distress is seeing, I see Eileen Lamb, get dragged on social media for showing, like legitimately her lived experiences with her child, or Charlie, with the most severe, profound autism. And she gets told that she's ableist, that she doesn't know her child, that they know better. And I honestly can't believe it, or maybe I can believe it. I guess I'm just surprised at how intense that commentary is. And so I just want to encourage all of you to think and reflect on, your own perspectives related to this and why you use certain terminology. I remember, thinking back to all of these debates around autism in my master's program and PhD program, almost about a decade ago at this point, it was drilled into my brain. We use person first language because we see the person first rather than the disorder, the disability, what have you. All of a sudden, though, that switch, like, nope, you must use identity first language. And it's like, okay, well, who is advocating for that? Does an entire population want that? Does the entirety of individuals with autism want that? I'm not sure. And I don't think that's the case based off of what all the empirical data we have to say. And so I've got a lot more that I could probably keep, tangenting on, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions and individuals to have some good, discussions. But I think the last thing I would just leave us with is that it's fine to have spirited discussions and it's okay to have different perspectives, but make sure that we're extending that courtesy to everybody. And especially in the field of behavior analysis right now, there is a lot of commentary on compassionate care and building therapeutic alliance with our clients. Interestingly, somewhere along the line, we have forgot to extend behaviors that we might label as compassionate towards each other. And so rather than have all of this infighting, we need to make sure that we have a unified front, that various perspectives are allowed, and we need to, just play nice and advocate for these individuals with the severest forms of behavior. Then Leslie, do you want to talk about the next steps, or I'm happy to also click through this now as well?
No, I'd love to share a little bit just real quick. One of our next steps that we're doing, we kind of have a two-prong approach. The first is conducting a survey where we are meeting individually with caregivers who we have a child who has undergone an FA, behavioral intervention plan, and asking, their preferences. So we're speaking with individuals themselves if they are vocal and able to speak about it. So we do have some individuals kind of level two who engage in very severe behavior or are able to share their points of view as well. So if you're interested, that QR code will take you to the link.
And so these are some of our preliminary results. And this is interesting. I want to highlight problem behavior based on our sample so far is the next to of 26 is the next to least percent acceptable. And so
Hmm.
something that Leslie and I have always talked about is we're happy to change our language based on data. And so if this comes back, and I'm not going to say that 2026 is the number of people that it takes to change terminology, but it's a sample. These are data. And so as I mentioned earlier, target behavior, I think that that tends to be used more in the experimental and translational realm. So it's interesting that that has near 100% acceptance. And that also sort of flies in the face of other advocates' recommendations to always use the specific term. So it's always saying aggression or always saying self-injury, for example. Target behavior is very well accepted. At the
Well,
same
and
time,
I'll say
oh,
one thing, Michael. So we now have about 50 responses, and one trend I'm starting to see, and I'm interested to see as we collect more responses if this will hold, is that individuals who have younger children have stronger opinions about terms that they think may be stigmatizing, like challenging, problem, destructive. And the individuals who have older children, one of the common things I keep hearing from them is, I don't really care what you call it. I just need you guys to help, right? We need help. We need medical. And I think I saw a comment in the chat that talked about that. It's a real privilege to have this discussion about what terms we want to use, because some individuals are in the ER with a detached retina, and we just need to know how to proceed. And so that's where having really clear terminology that we can look into the literature base, and clinicians, practitioners can access that evidence base quickly to treat and assess and triage is super important.
yep. And interesting. Dr. Wachtel, I just saw your comment. That was the example that I used earlier too, was retinal detachment. Like, yep, I'm sorry, that's a problem. Not being able to see and going blind from banging one's head against a wall is a problem. And
Hmm.
that's kind of sort of the line that I'll draw in the proverbial sand. And I'm willing to
Hmm.
stand on that and have that discussion with anybody that wants to have it. And I think, the data that Leslie just described are interesting too, because it's like, all right, once you've had, a loved one engaging in these behaviors for 13 years, 18 years, and they have profound autism, yeah, at that point, it's a problem. So I think that
Hmm.
is a good idea of,
Yeah, we'll do an
y-
analysis on some of these moderators.
yeah. And so, yeah, I think that that's just sort of before we open it up to discussion, we have a few more slides. The biggest thing is to just make sure that and we're not recommending to abandon one term or the other. That's not anything we're trying to do here, because that's the last, we don't want to be hypocrites and say, you can't say this term because people are saying to us or to everybody that you can't say this term. It frankly doesn't bother me what term
Hmm.
folks use. I just want to make sure that we aren't, again, tone policing or word policing our colleagues when they're using terminology. And so we all have shared goals of advocating and improving the lives of, individuals with profound and severe autism. So there's no need for this infighting. I also think too that if journals are going to require that authors use certain terms, just have that language be public facing and have a rationale for why you select to use that term. I don't think it can just be, I think this because. And then also, this is pretty straightforward for any of us working with our clients. What term do they prefer? As a crazy notion there. What term do they prefer? And so that's certainly one that we might consider as well. A few limitations to our study is we did only include journals published, American journals and journals published in English. They had to use single case research. It was behavior analytic and autism focused, and we used a 4-year sample. If anybody out there wants to go year over the past 40 years and look at every article published every year for 40 years, y'all are more than welcome to do the Lord's work, and I look forward to seeing, those very thorough results. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it will be interesting to look at maybe special education journals, and then I think too, a comment that we got in the review process, Leslie, correct me if I'm misremembering, was to look at even journals from like law enforcement and to see how
Hmm.
they're describing this.
Medical journals. Hmm.
Medical journals, law enforcement journals, and
Hmm.
so seeing how they describe it. Because I'm sure terms that like problem behavior, dangerous behavior, we know that that's happening in emergency settings all the
Hmm.
time. And
Right.
so those terms probably mean a very different thing in emergent settings compared to the settings and populations in which and with whom we currently work.
Mhm.
I don't want to close before we open it for discussion is, these behaviors, we want to reinforce the perspective that the National Council of Severe Autism has, is that severe behavior like aggression and self-injury, they're not neutral. And I do, that is again another hill that I'll die on, is to paint them as neutral. I do struggle to think of a strengths-based way to describe self-injury, especially head directed self-injury. And so just making sure that it's possible to hold multiple perspectives and two things can be true at once. And so I think that, that's unfortunately missing in today's, day and age, but I encourage all 20 some of us, 30 of us here in the proverbial Zoom room today to go forth and do that. The only way that these things get better if we're able to have these, courageous conversations with each other and be able to recognize that different perspectives are just that. They're different and they're allowed
Mhm.
to coexist. And so thank you all for your time, and I believe that we've got some plenty of opportunity for discussion at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is such an important topic, and we do have some questions in the Q&A we'll be answering here. I also put in the chat, just for this particular webinar, we really would love to see the participants here. What do you prefer as terms? And you can enter multiple options in there, and at the end of this, we'll kind of show a word cloud of what everybody is saying. I think it would be interesting just to see what you guys think. There's no right or wrong answers, and the answers are anonymous. It's not going to say so and so said what. So go ahead and click that link. It just answered that question too. But I wanted to ask you the how this plays out on the ethical side. I don't think that a lot of people have looked at the downstream effect of
Yeah.
sanitizing language. And I know in particular, I've had multiple examples of this on my own daughter's case, where provider searches are put out by the MCO and they hide the fact that there
Mhm.
are severe and challenging behaviors. And this is how they get an agency to agree to send
Mhm.
somebody into the house who has no idea what they're
Mhm.
walking into. They
Mhm.
are told she has autism and they think they're coming
Mhm.
in here to like build puzzles and play with trains and have no clue. We don't do this in other demographics, right? When
Mhm.
you think about uh, when before I even had my daughter, I worked as a CNA in a nursing home, and you got paid extra to work on a memory care unit, and you knew that that was going to come with severe and challenging behaviors with patients who were experiencing dementia and Alzheimer's, and you didn't look at this as a moral character flaw. They didn't tell us, hey,
Mhm.
you're just coming in here to build puzzles with grandma. You knew what you were coming in to do, and it was
Right.
easier to staff the case if people are aware ahead of time. And I have a real ethical problem with bringing staff into the house that doesn't know ahead of time
Mhm.
what the
Yep.
level of behaviors are in this
Right.
case.
Yeah. Well, I will say one thing is that, we were trying to figure out a way to even identify in claims data, so medical claims data, individuals who have comorbid behavior, and it doesn't exist because what we found out is that if individuals have that diagnostic code on, their notes, it'll get billed as a psychology visit instead of a medical visit, which is a lower reimbursement rate. And so the only way to really do that is to have it within the notes. So there's this lack of like reporting and differentiation. We have it even in behavior analysis, right? We accept all autism patients, and we're not prepared in a lot of these clinics to work with that very severe population. So they do different things to try to remediate that. We only accept up to age 8, for example, and we're not equipped to work with older individuals. That's kind of a way they're saying that. But I absolutely agree. I think there's real issues with not identifying the needs of the individual, because then we're not matching them with the supports, and we can't even advocate for the total amount of supports we need because it's invisible. We can't say we need 100 more physicians who have expertise in medical management, or we need to drive pharmaceutical drug discovery because this population is growing. So the data is absent, and it's very, I find that to be a real ethical concern. I don't know, Michael, if you had a thought or anybody else. Sorry.
No, I agree entirely, and that sort of gets at the whole crux of this issue is when we're trying to sanitize, the realities of individuals that have severe and profound autism or that engage in more severe behaviors. You're not just coming in there to play with trains and puzzles. I'm sorry, you're
Right.
coming in to not just manage, but also like hopefully reduce and increase, a desirable and more effective ways to communicate. And so that's what causes me to get a little fired up is when we're trying to, not,
Yeah.
it's like, nope, you're not allowed to describe that like that. Nope, 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 la, 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 la. And they say no. And, I have seen it out there. I have seen in presentations where, you know, um, behavior analysts themselves are advocating for total acceptance of behaviors like aggression. And it sounds like I'm lying when I say that, but it's like, no, I have seen it multiple times that they're saying, nope, you're trying to change the person. And it's like, oh man, let's go back to behavior analysis 101 where we don't change people, we change behaviors and environments. And so
Hmm.
that is just yeah, no, I'm right there with you where that's why this is so important is making sure you were allowed to use these terms to underscore and say how important this is.
I think
We have joined here our surprise guest, member of our board and director of the MBU at Kennedy Krieger, Lee Wachtel. Hi, Lee. Feel free to
hello.
jump in here in the discussion.
Sure. No, I mean I totally agree. I have a big problem with like the language police. I mean, I understand that in certain other arenas of life. But I mean, when you look at the huge problem of problem behaviors, which is a vast problem, and the vast number of people who are waiting to access services across the United States, when I look at the wait list of our unit of, close to 200 people, every one of those children and their parents believe they're applying for hospital admission not for fun and games, but because they believe that
Hmm.
their child's behaviors are highly problematic and have brought their lives to like a standstill and would sell their soul for an earlier
Hmm.
admission date to the unit. And that's not a dissimilar experience to hundreds, if not thousands of people across the United States. We hear these
Hmm.
stories like all the time on like a
Hmm.
daily basis. And I think it'd be like in anything else in medicine, if you were only to talk about like the nicer elements of, or the less extreme or the less severe elements and components of other illnesses, then there's no attention for the more severe. And you're never going to be able to meet that need. And it's a huge need. And trying to get rid of the language or making it nicer, like making it nicer and putting it under the rug serves nobody except maybe the people who don't need the service in the first place and doesn't do
Right.
anything to answer like the vast need, which is only like getting worse.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the irony of how this tone policing came about is supposedly to reduce stigma, and I am here to tell you this tone policing has only increased the stigma. That when
Yeah.
a parent is
Mhm.
told you shouldn't talk about the behavior so that we can get you staffed, what is that saying other than to shame these symptoms of a disability? This isn't somebody
Yeah.
who is morally bankrupt or has a bad parent who doesn't know anything about discipline. These are symptoms of a disability, and we're saying we're like implementing the disability hierarchy here, right? We're
Hmm.
saying these symptoms are taboo and not comfortable to talk about, and that to me only makes this stigma worse on
Right.
behaviors. It doesn't
Mm.
actually do anything to reduce them.
Hmm.
That's a really good point.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have some questions here in the Q&A. Jillian is our vice chair from New York. She says, for families dealing with severe aggression, self-injury, do you worry broader terms like challenging behavior can unintentionally minimize severity or delay if intervention? You suggested editorial culture may influence terminology shifts. How do we ensure language changes are being driven by clinical reality and outcomes rather than professional preference?
I'd like to answer the second and third questions first.
Okay.
And I think that the main way to do that is to have these conversations right now and to put out, again, not patting ourselves on the back, but put out papers like that. And so, there was a group of authors that wrote a response to our paper. And I was chatting with some other colleagues about other issues with this related to conflicts of interest and stuff. And it was a reaffirming comment where my colleague said, if people are writing responses to your paper, that means you're getting the attention of the right people that you're trying to convey this to. And so I do think that one of the ways to combat to just call it what it is, to combat the tone policing is just say like, no, the data show this. There are no definitive data that
Hmm.
say that we need to use this one specific term. I recommend, or I know that, this is your recommendation, but we're gonna respectfully stand our ground here and we're going to use this other term. And if you want to find a middle ground, if you want to have a some sort of compromise, you can put a little footnote in there and be like, other people might call this thing, we're going to use this terminology for XYZ reasons. And so I think
Yeah.
kind of being brave and saying, no, this is the term I'm going to use. I think that's the really the only way that I have thought about how to push back against that. Because I will say, I mean, I've experienced it firsthand where they're like, we will not accept your paper unless you change the term.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
that is just very
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll echo that. I always tell people I don't have opinions, I have data. And so one of the things we're trying to do, right, is conduct like the survey of the caregivers and individuals who have these behaviors, to see is there actually a preference, right? Or maybe it is asking the individuals themselves as they come in for our research studies. That's typically what I do. How do you prefer we talk about this for your child? But ultimately, I think we need to conduct more research to combat the opinions with the reality and with the data. And so things like we did in our survey, we have a little space that says, would you like to participate in a follow-up focus group? And part of that, we have kind of a series plan. But one of the things, Jackie, that you mentioned, I think is really important is we want to start to talk about and highlight the negative impacts of this sanitation of language, because it is not neutral, right? All of these things that you guys are saying that NCSA is saying that they're amplifying. One of the things I know I can do is I can bring that research to that. Like, and if we can play that role, I want to play that role. So I think that is one way of combating and ensuring that language is driven by the right, not the right, but the considerations for how it might impact. And then that second, I don't know if anybody, sorry, rest of the panel wanted to comment on those parts first.
Yeah, I've
What?
always found I've always found that like when something is in the peer-reviewed literature, it becomes a lot stronger because then no matter like what people say or no matter how much they bring like their emotions or their feelings into it, I mean, being able to point to something that's objective, published data takes a lot of that kind of emotion off of the
Mm-hmm.
table because it's just, well, here are the facts that those are feelings, but here are the facts. And like everything in medicine, relying on the facts and
Mhm.
objective findings get you a lot farther.
It's like,
Absolutely.
I recognize, a lot of these individuals, they're bringing their own personal values to things. Like, I've got my own strong set of personal values. Leslie does, Jackie does, Lee does. I would never try to force my own personal values down on somebody unless they wanted to. I'm down to talk about, my own personal values and, I'm pretty much an open book, as my students can attest. But I think that recognizing those in those spaces that are trying to put their own values down need to recognize that's not in the best faith effort. Because Jackie, like you described earlier, that's ultimately, having the opposite intended effect of being
Mm-hmm.
progressive, of leading to better outcomes. It's making things worse and more difficult. I do want to
Mhm.
make sure we touch on the first part of the question that I said I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to answer first. But so for families dealing with severe aggression and self-injury, do we worry that broader terms like challenging behavior can unintentionally minimize the severity? So that's actually why I advocate strongly for challenging or problem behavior. And then also, if you need to add the qualifier of severe to that, I think that does help illustrate it because I know this isn't, you know, entirely related to intervention, but I know when I'm writing grants, I'll refer to these collection of behaviors as problem behavior because I do think that clearly conveys that it's a problem. Duh, it's a problem. It needs address. It needs a solution. It needs some sort of addressing. But I think that if we reiterate every single time, oh, aggression, oh, self-injury, well, again, context matters. And so if you're working with a pediatrician and you need to say, we're having this issue of problem behavior, they're very likely to ask, well, what does it look
Mm-hmm.
like? And so if
Mhm.
you know that they might ask to begin with, well, just say it's self-injury, it's aggression. And it also depends on how many different behaviors there are. Like I mentioned, I
Mm-hmm.
refer to the collection of behaviors, and that's something that we found in our paper is it was most of our sample was behavior analytic in nature. And so when they take a function-based approach, they're addressing a collection of behaviors rather than individual forms or topographies of them. And so I think that's why we tend to see, or we saw a little bit more of those not collect summative term is what I'm looking for. We see those terms that summarize the entire corpus of behaviors that individuals are engaging in. But I think too, I'll defer to those that maybe have more experience with, insurance authorizations and things like that. But if you need to say those terms, by all means, you use whatever term is going to clearly convey the clinical necessity. That's again why we feel so strongly about not letting ourselves and our colleagues and these parents get tone policed with their terms. If you need to call something self-injury, call it self-injury. Don't let
That's
anybody make you feel bad about that.
That's an excellent point about like insurance, and that's actually something that
Hmm.
we deal with on a daily basis on the inpatient floor and has become even more acute in the past couple of years, to the point that if you do have, I'll give an example that one day one of our patients was doing very well and was like kind of laughing and giggling and playing on a yoga ball, and I in my mental status exam sort of presented that the patient was doing really well, and actually the insurance reviewer picked up on that like straight away. It was sort of just my excitement that sort of bled over into the note. But what we found to be able to get ongoing insurance authorization for these patients for them to be able to stay in an inpatient setting and get sufficient care is that, yeah, absolutely. We document that very carefully in the daily progress notes. Rates of self-injurious behavior, rates of aggressive behavior, injuries, episodes of restraint and seclusion, all the things that maybe nobody wants to talk about. But if
Hmm.
you are sanitizing it, then the question becomes, well, okay, please discharge the patient. Whereas if you state that the child, banged their head against the wall and had like a change in mental status and needed to be sent for an emergency CT in the emergency room, well, then you're probably going to get an authorization as you should. So, yeah, that language becomes actually in an insurance setting, an inpatient setting for ongoing authorization. Like the more details you share, the more likely you are going to be able to get authorization to continue to help that patient.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I find that parents have to do this kind of linguistic acrobatics when we're talking about our children's behavior because we also have to be very careful, right? There's this effort a lot of times when there are behaviors, then the state MCOs or the Medicaid administrators can have kind of an underhanded effort to force an institutionalization and say, well, this patient can't be safely served in the community because of their behaviors, instead of saying, and it makes it imply that the behaviors of the person are the problem and not the lack of supports that are appropriate to support that person. That might actually be quite safe in the community if they had the actual appropriate supports specific to problem behaviors, right? That we're not allowed to
Hmm.
talk about. And so they'll ask you questions like, well, is your child ever violent? And I always answer that as no, because
Right.
violence requires an intent, and my daughter doesn't have the capacity for intent. Someone else in the comments had mentioned, the legal implications of this. In Tennessee, we have Jillian's Law, and so there's a higher risk of incarceration for our patients here. And so we always have to be mindful when we're getting asked these questions, how are they going to use the answers we're saying? So we have to be very
Right.
precise as parents to answer
Mhm.
these questions in a way that describes the appropriate level of the behavior. So oftentimes I'll say she has high acuity behavior. She has symptoms of behaviors. I will continue to pull it back to a medical framing so it's not a something that she can't be supported in. It's something she needs that medical support for.
Yeah, you said two things that I think are really important. One of the things that one of the caregivers said that stood out to me as we're doing these surveys is they said when they call for help, 911, they're really careful the term they use because they've noticed if they say aggression, LEOs come out, law enforcement officers. If they say that their child is having some behaviors and they're really concerned about their mental health, well, then ambulance comes out. And so it's different who comes out depending on the language that they use. So, I mean, there's real implications in the service system as well. And then you were, oh, shoot, what was the second thing you were talking about,
The
Jackie?
legal implications with Jillian's law and incarceration capacity. I say high acuity, I frame it medically.
Yes, the medical thing, I think, is one of the issues that this comes down to is there's a real fight for the social model, the social disability model, right? That the individuals are having symptomatologies of their disability because of the social environment versus the medical model. This is not a disability. This is, so I think a lot of this is stemming from that kind of that argument. And so we're saying, no, we need medical supports. We need medical treatment. We need better pharmaceuticals. We need better monitoring and places that these individuals can go, hospitals, clinics, everything like that. So ultimately, that's one of the reasons I think this language is coming out. But unfortunately, of course, then it's affecting our services and they're affecting our ability to really present the issues and why we need these resources.
What's interesting too is I'm listening to all of this. What I think also helps illustrate some of the issues with this. I even feel vulnerable having this conversation
Right.
right now, and it's like shouldn't feel like this. Like somebody's gonna record a clip like, oh, he said this. He's so ableist because he said that we need to fix problem behavior. It's like golly, like if that's where we're at, we need to have a broader conversation about terms and respect, and again being respectful of each other. So yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to throw that out there as just something that I'm reflecting on and stewing in my brain, listening to all of you talk about these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And I
would
think,
agree with that 100%. I mean, I know where I work, they recognize the great value of the neurobehavioral unit and the intense suffering of the children and the reality of like what they're facing. But in so many things in society today, I mean, there's always this ongoing fear of like the vocabulary police may be out there to snatch you on something that like you wouldn't have ever even thought about. I mean, there's so many elements of that people have just become like really, really afraid to speak out on like a range of issues. And yeah, that's really sad when it means that, not speaking out and being fearful that somebody is going to like punish you or malign you or deride you in like a public setting means that you're not like doing your job as a care provider and advocating for the people who don't have the privilege of having this conversation. For the
mhm,
child in my unit who's detached a retina and needs access to a
right.
top level like retinal surgeon rapidly in order to like not lose an eye.
Yeah, and I think it's so. I really, that point that Jackie made is really important, right? I think some of these conversations are driven by wanting to kind of improve the stigma associated, but in reality, like if that is the goal, is to improve the stigma and improve services and supports and the environment, it's having the opposite effect. It's having the and so hopefully that those who are making these arguments hopefully they watch this. Like I'm okay if they watch it, Michael. I hope they watch it because I hope they hear from Jackie. Hopefully, in our maybe our focus group will come out with some of this stuff, and we can have a really productive conversation about how we can maybe work together better. And because ultimately we're infighting, and insurers are going to see that,
Yep.
federal government's going to see that,
Yep.
and if we aren't cohesive in the needs of our community, well, then there are other communities that are cohesive.
I would say I'm overly interested in the peer review process of behavior analysis. And so one of the things I'm pretty good at is sniffing out who reviewers are of certain things. And I would even imagine that the reviewer that left that comment on the second comment that I described today, I'm probably friends with that person or at least friendly with that
Right.
person. And it's like, can we sit down and talk about this? Because I would imagine that most of at least that individual or many of these individuals' perspectives is largely influenced by the Bottom of Butel paper. And I don't think that they would recognize what you pointed out today, Leslie, is that those sources are YouTube videos or
Hmm.
random checklists, and they totally just, replace again one narrative with another narrative. And it's so much,
Hmm.
it's very polarized. It's like, no, like let's sit down, have coffee, not fight this out over, comment section on LinkedIn. Let's actually like sit and talk
Hmm.
about this and say, like, okay, like, no, you're allowed to have your perspective, but I need you to recognize that I can have mine
Yeah.
as well. And
Yeah.
here's why I have mine. And if you value lived experiences so much, here's mine, and here are the other lived experiences that have left such a
Hmm.
profound lasting impact on me. And so that's kind of where I think that this
Yeah.
conversation needs to go.
I think even even unfriendly, right? Even Kristen and her work in her lab, I think she has good intentions, right? I've read her work, and I think some of her points are really valid and salient, and we agree with a lot of what she says. Ultimately, though, it's having the wrong impact, right? It's having the opposite impact. And so I hope she watches this, and please email us if you do. I'd love to have that conversation, because it's not neutral. And so I think that's ultimately what it's coming down to, is it's affecting people, right? It's affecting patients, it's affecting clients.
And
I'm
that's
sorry.
where I feel that like no matter like what words you use, it really matters like what you're standing for, and that people
Yeah.
might pick over a certain like term or a certain word, but really like we've all been emphasizing here, they're not having this conversation as like an esoteric exercise or to engage in an
Right.
argument with anybody, but because we recognize like a huge amount of suffering and a huge amount of need that's unmet, and that is the right thing as like healthcare providers to do, is look at like the needs of the people that we serve.
Mm-hmm. And that need that we see is kind of invisible, right? It's been invisible until recent efforts, profound, autism and NCSA. And so I think there's real value to making that visible, because now people understand the population that we're serving.
Yeah, they're just as real as anything else. I think in an age when we're fighting for like equity and like equal access of, equity across the board, that it has to include everybody. It's not really
Hmm.
equity if some people are left out.
Hmm. Right.
Mhm.
Right.
And the fact that this isn't unsolvable, and I think that that's
Hmm.
why the the administrative side of this in insurance or in state leadership oftentimes will kind of lean into, let's just not talk about behaviors, because they don't think that this is solvable. They think that these aren't
Mm.
treatable cases, that this is, this is something that is
Mm.
chronic and ongoing and can't be safely served in the community. And we found that just not to be true.
Mm.
We found that there are it's appropriate supports, and especially when you combine a multitude of things, that this may not be something you solve just with ABA, that you need to have a whole team approach to this. And when you do that, we see a lot of these people who previously were considered unsolvable actually thrive in a community setting. So I think that we can only have those conversations to get people better supports if we talk about this from a
Mm.
reality framing.
Mm.
And I just want to say this is a comment here from Sarah, and I want you guys to hear this, that this is her second presentation on this topic this week, and this is making her feel empowered
Mm.
to speak to our realities. And so I think that
Mm.
that's really important, that you guys hear that your work is important and it's making a difference and it's helping families and providers be able to have these conversations more. I know it's not comfortable to be the pioneers and leading the charge. Like, no, we're going to correct the pendulum swing a little bit. But it does make a difference. It really does.
I
Yeah.
do appreciate hearing that because I feel like I'm yelling into the void and shouting at clouds
Sometimes.
with pretty much every paper that I ever put out.
Hmm.
So it is nice to hear that. And
Hmm.
I do think that, I won't speak for Leslie, but I know for myself, I do need to hear that to know, like, it does give me the courage to keep having these
Hmm.
conversations, knowing that there are others that are aligned, because I feel like, we're having these whispers behind, like, hey, I agree with you. But it's like, no, like, let's have these conversations then. There's nothing wrong with talking
Yeah.
about it. So thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that.
I mean, when Michael and I first discussed, it was like, wait a minute, you think this too? I think this. What's happening here? Have you
Yeah.
noticed this? And that was like just having a second person. I was like, well, let's do something about this. Let's get some research. Let's get some, data to support this. We knew it was going to be, we knew we were going to get responses, right? When I bet this goes up on YouTube, we get more responses. That's okay, right? And I, it we are and I know Michael thinks this as well, but I am happy to take the brunt of these responses if it means that we can center the voices of this population who have been excluded so far. Somebody's going to have to push their way through, and we're only gathering people, right? So that push through is getting bigger, and I feel like we're actually getting some momentum and some movement.
I just want to share real quick the results here, which so the biggest one was challenging, and actually it looks like aggressive was the second biggest
Oh,
one.
interesting.
Destructive.
Just sure.
We want more clear terms as families. And we have dangerous, self-injurious, profound, severe, behaviorally complex, severe behavior symptoms, self-injury, aggression, and then problem is right here. Problem is right here.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of, you know, just a tiny little sample of our group here, but it does give you a little bit of insight as to at least what this side of the community really is looking for in
Hmm.
terminology. I think is more specificity, not less.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, well, we have all the questions answered. I know, thank you, Michael and Leslie. Some were written in the questions there. Any closing remarks, Barry? Because I know you needed to be done by noon. So, any closing remarks from our panelists?
No, I really appreciate you guys being a part of this today. If you're interested in participating in our studies or know people, here I'll just drop my email in the chat too. Uh, we would love to talk with you. We want to be guided by data, right? So contributing to that data is really important. Michael, anything you're thinking?
I'm gonna copy and paste yours so it goes to everyone in the chat because I
Oh,
think
sorry,
no, it's fine.
whoops.
I think a default goes to just the host and the panelists. No, I just want to thank everybody for I poke my lab will attest that I poke fun at the phrase hold space, but I appreciate all of you holding that space and like being willing to engage in this conversation. I know that it can be both difficult to have, but also like Leslie described our experiences with when we first had this with each other. You can also find a sense of community and having those
Hmm.
conversations. And so I think knowing that you aren't alone in thinking this and you aren't alone in recognizing like maybe you don't agree with certain terms that maybe we said today, but you're like, you know what though? Like we are like kind of not being database, we aren't listening to people who are very profoundly impacted by autism. Isn't it interesting that we're only centering these people's voices on TikTok and Instagram? Maybe I should look into this differently. So yeah, I just encourage, but student of life, be lifelong learners, and yeah, just
Yeah.
don't be afraid to lean into these uncomfortabilities. And I'm happy to chat with anybody that wants to.
Yeah,
Lee?
I would second that and just say that it's important to I keep the eye on like why we're having these conversations and the
Right.
fact that it really is a luxury that we're able to engage in these conversations
Right.
because for many individuals who are dealing with, if you want to call them challenging behaviors, difficult behaviors, problem behaviors, whatever,
Mm.
the average person dealing with those in the home doesn't have a free second to do anything other than try and get to the next minute of their life. So we're lucky to be able to have these conversations. And so we should continue to
Right.
have these conversations for the benefit of those who can't
That's
and
right.
who really rely on our voices.
That's right.
Absolutely. So again, community, we highly encourage everyone, whether you are here live or you're watching this after the fact, in case, because I don't think they'll see the chat, but LESLIE.NEELY, Leslie.Neely@utsa.edu, to inquire about participating in the research. They want to hear from you. Whether you agree or disagree with the content here today, we want to hear from you. So go ahead and reach out to Leslie, and she'll also be in DC with us. So,
I'll be
and is
there.
there a link for this latest research on the topic?
I'm grabbing it
Michelle
right
Wright,
now.
another member of our board, is asking. I can send. I don't know if it's public access,
So
open access.
we have it is we have a recruitment specifically through NCSA. We are approved, so we're able to share that link, Jackie, in that email. I will say we're trying to be very cautious about our inclusion criteria right now to make sure we're capturing the correct, the actual the individuals who are living with us and experiencing this. Um, Oh, open access for the current one? No, it is. Sorry, for the actual paper. Thank you. No, it is, and it is open access. And Michael just
Okay,
dropped the
great.
link.
Yeah, yeah. So Michael dropped the link there, and very much appreciate you guys. This to me is the most life-threatening symptom that most of our community deals with, and so the work you're doing is
Mhm.
incredibly important and can save lives. If we can have these conversations more meaningfully and openly, honestly, then we can develop better supports for these individuals to
Yeah,
help them thrive. That is why we're having this conversation, not to be ableist, not to harm anybody or create stigma, but to actually stop it. Thank you. Thank
absolutely.
you for
Thank you.
attending today.
Thank you guys for having us.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.